Putin is losing as Russians start leaving Ukraine's Kherson city. Tens of thousands of civilians and Russian-appointed officials are being moved out of Ukraine's southern Kherson region ahead of a Ukrainian offensive, says the Russia-installed local leader. Vladimir Saldo said all Russian-appointed departments and ministries would cross the Dnieper River. Some 50 to 60,000 civilians would also leave in an organized, gradual displacement, he said earlier. Ukraine has called on residents to ignore the Russian move. The head of Kherson's regional administration said Russia wanted to take civilians hostage and use them as human shields. The transfer or deportation of civilians by an occupying power from occupied territory is considered a war crime. In a separate development, Russia's Vladimir Putin said he had signed a decree imposing martial law on 4 Ukrainian regions, including Kherson, which Moscow annexed last month in a move rejected as illegal by the international community. He told Russia's Security Council that it would give regional leaders additional powers to maintain social order and safeguard important facilities. On Tuesday night, residents in Kherson started receiving text messages, urging them to evacuate immediately to avoid shelling of residential areas by Ukrainian forces. The messages said transport across the Dnieper River would be available from 7 o'clock on Wednesday. They are told to evacuate because the evil Ukrainians are going to shell the city, one resident told the BBC, asking to remain anonymous. People are panicking because of propaganda. Russian TV footage on Wednesday showed a number of people gathering near the west bank of the Dnieper. As they queued for boats, it was not clear how many were leaving. But Ukrainian officials have questioned whether large numbers of people are actually being evacuated, suggesting that images of a crowd assembled by the river are largely for show. Serhiy Klin, an aide to the ousted head of the Kherson region, suggested the deportations theater could be acting as cover for a much bigger Russian move, a complete military evacuation from the west bank of the river. I foresee the withdrawal of troops, he said, adding that he expected Russian forces to attempt to destroy the city after leaving. Russia, he said, was planning to establish a new capital for the Kherson region at Henichesk, close to the Crimean Peninsula, adding that banks and offices related to the occupation of Kherson had already been evacuated. One Kherson resident told the BBC's World Service that she was not going anywhere until Kherson was liberated by Ukrainian troops. People are not panicking, nobody wants to be evacuated. She said that Russian soldiers were now worried how they could survive in the city. There are plenty of them here, they are dressed as civilians. We can see them, they are different to Kherson people. They walk in groups, their hair is cut short, they are dressed mainly in black. Ukrainian officials have warned that this might represent the start of a forcible deportation to Russia. In early September, the UN said there were already credible accusations of forced deportation of Ukrainian children from other Russian-occupied areas. Russia's ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, called the allegations unfounded. As part of the decree, President Putin announced 3 additional levels of heightened security inside Russia. The highest level applies to Russia-annexed Crimea and other areas near the border with Ukraine, such as the regions of Belgorod, Kursk, and Krasnodar. In these areas, there will be more security, possible evacuation orders and some restrictions placed on travel. Regional authorities will be given more powers to ensure measures are implemented, establish territorial defense and mobilize the economy for the war effort. In Moscow and surrounding central and southern regions, regional authorities have the power to introduce similar, but less severe, restrictions. Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak pointed out it was less than a month since Russia had held a ceremony to annex Kherson. Reality can hurt if you live in a fictional fantasy world. Late on Monday, Russia's new military commander in Ukraine, General Sergei Surovikin, had described the situation in Kherson city, the regional capital, as difficult. A Russian-installed official, Kirill Stremousov, warned Kherson residents that Ukrainian forces would launch an assault on the city in the very near future. No one is going to retreat, but we also want to save your life. Please move as quickly as possible to the left bank, he added. Mr. Saldo, who was appointed governor of the region by Moscow, told Russian TV that no one was about to surrender, but it was undesirable for residents to remain in a city facing military action. In the past 2 days, more than 5,000 people have left Kherson, he was quoted as saying. The head of Ukraine's presidential office said Moscow was trying to intimidate residents with fake news that Ukraine's military was shelling their city. It is a fairly primitive tactic, taking into account that the AFU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, do not shell cities, Andrei Yermak wrote on Telegram. Earlier this month, Kherson's exiled deputy mayor said only 100,000 residents remained in Kherson city of the pre-war population of 320,000, with many fleeing Russia's occupation. The mayor of Russian-occupied Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, warned that Kherson civilians were facing enforced deportation and being deprived of their homes so that Russia could populate the city with soldiers and traitors. Last month, Ukraine said 2.5 million people had been forcibly deported from Ukraine to Russia. The Russian-appointed governor accused Ukraine of building up for a large-scale offensive and planning to destroy the Kakhovka Dam on the river Dnieper, flooding the area. Kherson was the first major city to fall to Russian forces when they invaded Ukraine in February. However, in just a few weeks, the Ukrainian military has recaptured territory in the north of the region and pushed as far as 30 kilometers, 19 miles, south along the Dnieper, threatening to trap Russian troops. Ukrainian officials said last week that 400 square kilometers, 155 square miles, of territory had been regained in less than a week. Russian forces have also been hit by damage to the bridge linking annexed Crimea to Russia. An explosion earlier this month has severely affected Russia's ability to resupply its troops. Ukraine alleges Russian dirty bomb deception at nuke plant. Ukraine's nuclear energy operator says Russian forces have performed secret work at Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Ukraine's nuclear energy operator said Tuesday that Russian forces were performing secret work at Europe's largest nuclear power plant, activity that could shed light on Russia's claims that the Ukrainian military is preparing a provocation involving a radioactive device. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu made an unsubstantiated allegation that Ukraine was preparing to launch a so-called dirty bomb. Shoigu leveled the charge over the weekend in calls to his British, French, Turkish and US counterparts. Britain, France and the United States rejected it out of hand as transparently false. Ukraine also dismissed Moscow's claim as an attempt to distract attention from the Kremlin's own alleged plans to detonate a dirty bomb, which uses explosives to scatter radioactive waste in an effort to sow terror. Energoatom, the Ukrainian state enterprise that operates the country's 4 nuclear power plants, said Russian forces have carried out secret construction work over the last week at the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Russian officers controlling the area won't give access to Ukrainian staff running the plant or monitors from the UN's atomic energy watchdog that would allow them to see what the Russians are doing, Energoatom said Tuesday in a statement. Energoatom said it assumes the Russians are preparing a terrorist act using nuclear materials and radioactive waste stored at the plant. It said there were 174 containers at the plant's dry spent fuel storage facility, each of them containing 24 assemblies of spent nuclear fuel. Destruction of these containers as a result of explosion will lead to a radiation accident and radiation contamination of several hundred square kilometers, miles, of the adjacent territory, the company said. It called on the International Atomic Energy Agency to assess what was going on. The UN Security Council was scheduled to hold closed-door consultations about the dirty bomb allegations later Tuesday at Russia's request. Russia asked the Council to establish a commission to investigate its claims that the United States and Ukraine are violating the convention prohibiting the use of biological weapons at laboratories in Ukraine. Soon after Russia's February 24 invasion of Ukraine, its UN ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia, claimed that secret American labs in Ukraine were engaged in biological warfare, a charge denied by the US and Ukraine. The Kremlin has insisted that its warning of a purported Ukrainian plan to use a dirty bomb should be taken seriously and criticized Western nations for shrugging it off.